You've tamed the voices in your head. You've put your courage to the test. Laid all your doubts to rest. Your mind is clearer than before. Your heart is full and wanting more. Your future's at the door. Give it all you got. No hesitating. You've been waiting all your life. This is your moment. This is your moment in time. This is your moment. This is your moment to shine, to shine, to shine. So shine on. And every time you hit the wall, remember you can have it all, even the mighty fall. It's closer than it's ever been, and now it's more than just a win. It's where your life begins, yeah. There's no holding back, no overthinking. You've been reaching all your life. This is your moment. This is your moment in time. This is your moment. This is your moment to shine, to shine, to shine. This is your moment. You got to give it all that you got. Don't hesitate and don't ever stop. You've spent a lifetime waiting for this day. This is your moment. Now's not the time for you to hold back. Don't overthink, it's time to react. Moment has come, don't let it slip away, away, away. It's closer than it's ever been, and now it's more than just a win. It's where your life begins. You've tamed the voices in your head. You've put your courage to the test. Laid all your doubts to rest. Your mind is clearer than before.
Hi, everyone. Samanthropolitics. Oh, hi, everyone, and welcome to Samanthropolitics, your source on global politics and women's rights, with a focus also on United States. I apologize that I was gone for Thanksgiving week. I hope that everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I know it was definitely a weird one for many people not being able to visit family, but hopefully you got to eat turkey in solidarity over Zoom together. So a lot of things have been happening. Obviously, we have a new president-elect. I think since that we last spoke, Trump has agreed to concede if the Electoral College, or when the Electoral College does vote for President-elect Biden in December. We've also had some very historic Supreme Court case rulings. So you all might have remembered when I went on a rant about why Amy Coney Barrett was not a feminist. Well, two very important rulings have taken place in the last week around COVID and religious gatherings. So basically, something that's been happening with COVID is that a lot of governors are instilling rules, as they should be, on banning large gatherings of people indoors, because that's where it's most likely to spread. So one of the things that had happened is that Cuomo had imposed a ban on religious services of a certain size within New York City in order to combat the virus. Now, the Supreme Court took the case when the archdiocese and the synagogues in Brooklyn basically came up and said this is religious discrimination. And Amy Coney Barrett was the deciding vote, basically in favor of the religious institutions that Cuomo had no right to bar religious gatherings. Now, if you look at earlier decisions concerning the same issue in California and Nevada, decided in May and July, the court did allow the state governors to restrict attendance at religious services. What's the difference? We no longer have Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the court, and we now have Amy Coney Barrett, who leans very, very far right. So then the US Supreme Court yesterday did a very similar thing within California in light of their new New York ruling, saying that now the same type of ruling that Governor Gavin Newsom had put in place about indoor religious services and saying that there couldn't be huge indoor services, they basically said same thing, delivering a blow to Gavin Newsom and siding with the church. So what exactly is going on here? Now, there's been a lean of the court towards religious liberty as, you know, this huge deal. And the court itself has actually taken a lot more cases about religious liberty than they have. You know, in the past 20 years, they've taken way more cases than they did before because the Supreme Court can choose what cases they take. So if you look at it, they're leaning more and more religious. And the irony is that America is actually leaning more and more secular. We have, especially for people under age 36, it is the most non-religious population within the United States. So it's kind of ironic that the Supreme Court is going more and more right when the population is going more and more left. The other thing is, obviously, that's deeply, deeply concerning is the court's now proclivity to put religion over public health concerns. The irony of all of this is that one of the I can't remember who it was. One of the priests said basically that he said, please, Dr. Francis Collins basically called on religious leaders to say, please keep your worship spaces closed. So it's just kind of ironic to me that these, I mean, we are in a serious crisis. LA just issued a stay-at-home order. New York was doing great for months, and all of a sudden New York's seen a tip like this. And all of these governors are trying to do is to restrict gatherings of large people, because from a public health perspective, that's how the virus spreads. It's from being consolidated in indoor spaces. So what frightens me and what should frighten you is this propensity to put religion above public health. And so this is a show about women's rights. Where else is that important? Abortion, obviously, right? Abortion is a health issue. It's a women's health issue. But if we have a court that places religion over health, we could see something pretty scary in terms of abortion as well. So this is something to watch out for. You've also seen on a federal level, you've seen a lot of the Trump-appointed judges rule on behalf of the churches and the synagogues and the religious bodies. And you've seen all of the Democratic governors or Democratic judges that have been appointed actually rule in favor of court orders or governors' stay-at-home orders or restrictions on religious gatherings. So are Trump-appointed judges more religious, or is it like, oh, well, Trump says that this should be allowed, so therefore I'm supposed to vote like that? So I think what this makes so clear is that judges are not impartial, and that if we're really relying on our justice system to make sure that COVID doesn't spread, I don't think that that's something that we can rely on. And I don't necessarily think that we can rely on our justice system to do the right thing, which is a little bit scary. My goodness. So moving on, something that is super exciting that I'm really excited about, and our guest, who I'm going to be bringing in shortly, has been a huge proponent of diversity within the new administration, including gender diversity. So something very historic is that President-elect Biden has been picking some positions that have never been held by women before. He's picking women to lead these areas. So Zach, can you just pop that slideshow in? And Disco Rat says they are religious. They try to be impartial, but they are morally based on a certain book. And I think, you know, it's a really good point. I think it's when you grow up deeply religious, thinking that, you know, abortion is murder, or that your religion is under threat, that people are trying to, you know, there's a war on Christmas, so they're trying to get rid of your faith, then there's that proclivity to say, they're attacking me because of my religion, they're attacking my religion. And also to make decisions from religion, because religion and identity are deeply intertwined. It's extremely hard to separate those two things. So I think that's really important to note. Thanks for pointing that out. Zach, can you go to the slideshow of the women, if you didn't already, please? Gracias. Slideshow is up. Thank you, Zach. So historic female picks for the cabinet that have never been women before. So Janet Yellen has been appointed the Secretary of the Treasury, or nominated to be the Secretary of the Treasury. Avril Haines, who is a former top CIA official and Deputy National Security Advisor, has been put as the Director of National Intelligence. And the United States Ambassador to the UN that has been nominated is Linda Thomas Greenfield, who is a career diplomat and also an African-American woman. This is exciting because as of late, there haven't been that many career diplomats actually put in this position. It's usually been, if we look at Nikki Haley, I just can't with Nikki Haley. Like, she had zero international experience. She had no idea what she was doing. Like, I really feel like she's like the female equivalent of Mike Pence. She's like this robot that kind of walks in and makes these decisions based on absolutely nothing. So I'm going to be bringing in a very special woman, as I mentioned, who's been very central in pushing diversity within the Biden administration before he was even elected. So she is actually Ambassador Gina Abercrombie Winstanley, and she was the U.S. ambassador to Malta. Now, I want to just give you a brief history of African-American women who were ambassadors. Now, the first African-American woman to be an ambassador was in 1965 when President Lyndon B. Johnson appointed Patricia Harris, and this was a political appointee, so it was not it was not a career foreign service officer, as the U.S. envoy to Luxembourg. So she was the first Black woman to be an American ambassador. However, it took another 25 years for the first Black female ambassador who was a career diplomat to be appointed. And that was in 1990 when George H.W. Bush nominated Aurelia Brazial to represent the U.S. before the Federated States of Micronesia. She also became the ambassador to Kenya and Ethiopia. Now, Trump has had a nauseating record when it comes to ambassadors. Of 183 ambassadors in the Trump administration, guess how many are African-American? Trace, 3. Of those 3, all are men. There have been 0 African-American women ambassadors under the Trump administration, which says something about how much Trump deeply values diversity. We all know that he really, really cares. So I want to give a brief bio of our guest, and then I'm going to bring her in, and I'm excited for a lively conversation, and please ask questions and comments, and happy to have you pipe in. So Ambassador Gina Abercrombie Winstanley, she's been a diplomat for 30 years and was the longest serving U.S. ambassador to the Republic of Malta. Through a series of senior positions that included advising the commander of the U.S. cyber forces on our foreign policy priorities, expanding our counterterrorism partners and programs as deputy coordinator for counterterrorism, and coordinating the largest evacuation of American citizens from a war zone since World War II, her professional life has played out almost daily in international media. Now, she began her work in teaching and leadership development as the chairwoman for Middle East Area Studies at the Foreign Service Institute. Early in her career as a U.S. diplomat, she served in Baghdad, Jakarta, and Cairo. So just think about that. Baghdad, Jakarta, and Cairo. It's all wild places. Before becoming the special assistant for the Middle East and Africa to the Secretary of State. Her Middle East assignments included monitoring in the Gaza Strip, election monitoring, and an assignment where she was the first woman to lead a diplomatic mission in Saudi Arabia, which I found absolutely incredibly fascinating. In addition to the department, she's also held senior positions at the Defense Department and the National Security Council. Prior to that, she was a fellow on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for the then ranking member, you may know who that was, Senator Joseph Biden. She's also a recipient of the Maltese Order of Merit, Department of State Meritorious and Superior Honor Awards. So I'm super excited to bring in Ambassador.
Well, good evening.
Good evening. Welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here.
Oh, good. So, I mean, your career has just been amazing. I mean, all over the place. Not easy postings. You know, this wasn't a Paris, London, Rome jaunt you had in the Foreign Service.
I'm not old enough yet.
You know, I didn't really put this in your pre-questions, but how do you handle that as a U.S. diplomat, especially as an African American woman, to kind of go to these places that, you know, you were in Iraq, in Indonesia, and Egypt. So these are not easy places to be a woman, let alone an African American woman. And then you were in Saudi Arabia. So how do you like had that resilience to like deal with all of that?
Yeah. A lot of it comes from the ability when you are representing the United States abroad, you go as an American, as a U.S. diplomat, and by and large, that is how I have been received. Any challenges that I've had have come more from colleagues than from the host nation, shall we say. You know, they watch American movies, they know we come in all stripes and colors, as it were. So the challenges have been in the Middle East from time to time as a woman. You have to get that honorary status as a male. Certainly in Saudi, I had to modify my professional attire a great deal. And you have to enter into a lot of it, I believe, successfully with a sense of humor, with not going with a chip or expecting problems and giving people the benefit of the doubt and the space to retract themselves, shall we say, from misstatements or miscalculations. So I think that smooths all waters, and those are basic diplomatic skills. You've got to give your the other party with whom you're negotiating or your interlocutor space to retrieve themselves, to save face, to continue the discussions. And if the relationship is built well, you'll find yourselves laughing over it, you know, as time goes on.
So I want to go back to something you said in there, which was that you found that you had more challenges from your colleagues than you did from host countries. So I want to make sure not to skip over that. So, you know, something that an article that you were quoted in said, for some Black diplomats, in particular Black female diplomats, traveling outside the US and representing America to the rest of the world was the first time they felt that they were treated like Americans.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty powerful stuff. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that?
Sure. In this country, as minorities and women know, when we are going into predominantly male spaces or predominantly European American spaces, as far as heritage is concerned, we are often questioned bona fides for being in the room, our right to be at the table, the value of what we have to contribute is often second guessed, undermined, doubted, discounted. And so we have to go in, you know, our parents told us as women and minorities, you got to be twice as good to get half as far. So there's that saying. But you certainly have to go in not only knowing your brief, knowing your portfolio, knowing your business, as my mom used to say, but confident enough to speak with the feeling that you are unwelcome or that you are being doubted. It takes even more courage to speak up when you know that people are, or feel that people are ready to discount what you're going to say or to second guess what you have to say. You know, there's that saying of women applying for positions only if they've got 9 out of 10 or 11 out of 10 of the elements that are required, and men being comfortable to go for it if they've got 2 out of 10.
Right.
So that reticence, you know, and in my career, I think, you know, how many times did I sit quietly listening, hoping to learn and hearing the guys talk around the table, but being reticent to speak up myself, only to realize as I listened that they didn't know any more than I did. So I certainly tell younger women
or
now,
they knew
speak
less,
up.
frankly.
Yeah.
Or they knew
Yes,
less.
this is all in the U.S. Yeah.
So then you say that when you're abroad, it's almost like when you're wrapped in the American flag.
Yes.
People are actually more respectful to you because you have that identity kind of along with you.
You are
So interesting.
America. So when I was in Baghdad as a young diplomat first tour, I had to negotiate a visa treaty. We had to change the amount of time we got to use visas and reciprocally. So it was a reciprocity negotiation. And although it was my first assignment, I had some training, but gosh, I was more green than brown in all honesty. But I was representing the United States of America, and I was the interlocutor, and nobody else was coming in the room to lead those negotiations. It was me, and therefore they listened to me as the United States of America. It was a heady feeling. It really was.
It's amazing to have that feeling of it almost feels like you were able to kind of gain a sense of power that you didn't have before from.
Yes, that burden of being, questioned whether I could actually do the job, that doesn't happen from people across the table. Yeah. Well, I think it was former Vice President Gore who talked about putting stuff in a lockbox. So those little concerns, when you are representing the United States, there's not space for those. You put them in a little box and set them aside and do your job.
I love that. So you served as the first female envoy in Saudi Arabia, the first consul general in Saudi Arabia. So, it's funny. I did a workshop for Saudi women. It was like a empowerment public speaking workshop for a bunch of Saudi women entrepreneurs. They were probably 19 or 20. And I kind of said that, as women, we have to deal with these challenges in America and in Saudi Arabia. And they were so defensive, and they were like, the Saudi government brought us here. They're so good to us, blah, blah, blah. And I know like things have happened, like obviously women finally have the right to drive, but then you still have like one of the women activists who was one of the ones behind getting women the right to drive has been put in prison. So how do you, and I wonder how because I'm sure you pushed for women's rights in the region, but how do you deal with that double standard?
Yeah. The way I came to understand it after living in Saudi for 3 years was to recognize that there are women just as capable as you and I are, that there were women who are absolutely fierce advocates for themselves and for other women. There are women who are in powerful positions, both government-wise and in the private sector. There are women who traveled, who led businesses, who managed their households. The difference between those women and us isn't their ability to do everything that you and I do and do it just as well. The difference is you and I, generally speaking, have the law behind us to help us reach our potential, to help level that playing field, to help us demand our rights. And Saudi women have to depend on a male relative for what rights they get. It took, and in some cases still, even now, takes a father, a brother, a husband, or a son to give you permission to start a business, to work outside the home, to travel overseas, to go to school even. While I was there, a friend who was in a divorce case, and the husband refused the right of the children to go to school, which was a tactic to put pressure on the wife to accept the settlement because her children couldn't go to school. He had that right in Saudi Arabia. Well, the law in this country would support her in putting those children into school. And that's the difference, whether it is the benevolence of a male or the right under the law.
So what do you see in terms of the Saudi legal system ever letting women make their own choices? Like at what point is that gonna, like, how far away are we from that?
Yeah. Well, more importantly, how far are they? And it's a question that really has to be answered internally. There certainly have been important strides made. There is a greater space for women in public life now than when I was there in the mid 2000s. The fact that, you know, women have the right to drive. There's a joke in Saudi these days, which is that women have the right to travel, but they don't have the right to get out of their house without the permission of that male relative.
Oh,
So
funny.
it's that tension that people, you know, people joke about everything. So that tension is very much in place. I believe the most important thing that's going to change life for all Saudis, because when you take care of the women, when you take care of mothers, you take care of the entire family. When you educate women, you educate the entire family. This is absolutely known. Nobody will argue with that. They just may not value the entire family being educated. But when the justice system gives equal rights to women, when they have the ability to go into court, you know, with an advocate to fight for their position, and the law is going to support a level playing field, that's when I think things will change exponentially. When is that going to happen? That's really going to be up to Saudi men and Saudi women.
So another thing that happened, I think that's a really, you know, great reflection. Another thing that happened, which kind of blew my mind, was that you were there when there was an Al-Qaeda attack.
Yeah.
Can you take us through that? I mean, wow.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, dealing with violence of all sorts, whether it's, you know, natural disasters, crime, or terrorism, it has increasingly become part of the life of our representatives overseas. And many Americans, unfortunately, don't know that diplomats often put their lives on the line to represent the United States. And we do so with pleasure and fully owning the privilege that we have to represent our country. In this case, the security situation had been deteriorating over the prior 2 years. By the time that the attack had happened, we'd had enough information about planned attacks that we had evacuated all of our non-essential personnel. So when I got to Saudi, we had 26 children at post, including my two. I had a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old, along with my husband, and there were many other families at post. But because of the security situation, first of all, we had to send all the families out. So my husband had 3 days to take my children and leave the country.
Wow.
And find someplace else to call home. Then we lost many valued staff members, colleagues, because they were single parents. So my assistant had to leave. She had a daughter. She's a single mom. We couldn't send an 11-year-old out of the country without her mother.
Right.
So we had a lot of upheaval as we were still trying to cope with the security situation. They came through our gate. It was a vulnerable position. We knew it. We put in place things to try and make up for the vulnerability of the gate. They were not sufficient, such as life and such as death. 5 of our colleagues, our friends, were killed by the terrorists and by the Saudi government because they were being used as human shields, and 10 were injured.
Was this a suicide bomb, or what was the attack?
They made it through our security perimeter and had access to the grounds of the consulate for several hours, and took some of our local staff as human shields.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Well, that led directly to me becoming very interested in our efforts to counter terrorism.
Right.
And led almost directly to my position as a Deputy Assistant Secretary, Deputy Coordinator for Counterterrorism, where I was responsible for building partnerships around the world, helping to train anti-terrorism forces around the world, working on border security, and some other programs that I can't talk about here.
Well, so let's go to that in terms of anti-terror strategies around the world. Obviously, you have lots of different groups with different orientations based on ethnicity, religion, whatever they subscribe to. What were some of the kind of anti-terror tactics that you saw as most effective, or that were kind of being tried and tested, and maybe what were some that were terrible?
Yeah. Well, certainly the one, we don't want to tell you the terrible ones because they might still be in place somewhere. So they're going to tell you what's not effective.
Well, like dropping leaflets over and being like, don't join Al-Qaeda. I mean, like, that was not effective. Let's be honest.
What we found, and what has been a core tenet of our counterterrorism policy, has been the recognition that there are local drivers to get young people radicalized. So we're trying to prevent terrorist activity, which means we have to counter extremism and hopefully prevent it. But you can't, it's not one, size fits all. You have to understand what it is that's driving young people to either giving up hope, or through boredom, or through monetary need, because it does depend on what country. In some countries, I won't mention names of countries, I'll try not to. In some countries, the terrorist organization is recruiting young men with $100 a month, and they need it to feed their families. A good counterterrorism policy would be to pay them $110 a month not to join. It might be someone who is attending a local mosque where there are extremist preachers at the mosque. A good counterterrorism policy might be to fund a rival mosque where more moderate, more accurate teachings of the Quran, Islam, etc. can be held. It might be that there's boredom, they're hanging out with nothing to do, and therefore they're easy prey for someone to come and talk to them about, this is how you should be spending your time. So maybe it's setting up midnight basketball to keep young men occupied. So all of those things have to be looked at in the locality. What is the local driver? And that means making partnership with, not just the US military or intelligence agencies or the Counterterrorism Bureau at the Department of State taking the lead on this, but we need local partners. We need people on the ground who understand what those drivers are. And particularly, we need women, because women are on the front lines and they are often the peace builders. They are the ones that bear the burden of conflict, of war, of natural disaster and terrorism. And therefore, we must be part of those who are at the table identifying the resolutions, the solutions, the way forward. And that's something that the United States has understood, been slow to implement. But under this administration, the Women, Peace, and Security Act was passed, and the State Department has, at least in writing, understood that we have to have the role of women and women's voices in all parts of our foreign policy. Not much has been done on it, but I'm extraordinarily hopeful that the incoming administration is going to take the groundwork that's been laid and run with it.
Absolutely. I think it's so interesting thinking about, local solutions to local issues. I mean, it's obviously so smart, but it's not something that's necessarily done.
No, and that sometimes, what is it, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail? I mean, as there's so many actors who are active in this field, who bring their expertise and want to use it. And that's good, that's nice, but it's not always the right thing.
Right.
And so that coordination is extremely important.
Right. Like I remember in Syria, when we were looking at why people join ISIS in Syria, they would give them a house that had been, a house, and then they would give them a house and a wife. And it's like, oh, here you go, everything that you're supposed to have, like a house and a wife, and you're living on your parents' couch in some country, and you now have like a big house for free, and a wife, and power, and maybe a salary.
Other
But
things to occupy your time.
right,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
And then looking at why women got recruited to go be wives, it was like this presented as this glamorous journey of like this, marry this sexy fighter who's fighting for your, religion. And yeah, I found one of the really interesting quandaries to be, I wonder what your opinion is on this, is the repatriation of the young women that went and then ended up bearing children, and their ISIS husbands died. What's your opinion? Like, do those women represent a terrorist risk to their home countries, do you feel, if they're repatriated?
Yeah. Well, it certainly depends on which woman. But it is important to recognize that women are not just victims of terrorism, but we are perpetrators of terrorism.
Absolutely.
And we are part of the solution to terrorism. So we have to look at us in all of those roles and hopefully use at least two of them to work against that third when we are perpetrators of terrorism. It's such a difficult issue. We struggle with it. The Europeans struggle with it. Some Middle Eastern countries struggle with it. Some of them don't. But the individual case has to be looked at. What are your ways of de-radicalizing these young women who come back? And some of them have already been miserable and changed their minds, but some of them have not. You certainly can't expect women to have any less fervor and focus and fanaticism, for that matter, for the cause than men. So you've got to look at them individually, and you have to deal with the challenge that people at home have felt betrayed, damaged, hurt, killed, perhaps lost loved ones, and to have a national welcoming of people of saying that, you are ours, can be very, very difficult. It's something that countries are going to be struggling with for quite a while longer. And I would simply say that there's no one answer to that either. You really have to look at the individual. Where are they? What are their circumstances? Do they have family waiting for them who are going to help in this de-radicalization, who will be responsible, who will be part of that social safety net to keep an eye on them, to a better eye than they did the first time, say, to ensure that they are not re-radicalized. So it's a challenge.
I have one more question with regards to counterterrorism, and it's just, these are things that I wonder about on a daily basis. U.S. drone strikes in Yemen and U.S. support of Saudi Arabia in, arms sales to Saudi Arabia, who are bombing Yemen. How much do you think, or do you think that's been a driver at all for radicalization of Yemenis?
I would say that it hasn't been needed. I mean, Yemen has been a heartbreaking, challenging issue for us because Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, as you know, Anwar al-Awlaki was based in Yemen, in the early 2000s, in the mid 2000s. So this is not a new problem. It is one that is, associated with, some of those local drivers, poverty. What else do you have to do with your time? Do you see any hope through the normal channels of governance, of political power? And if you don't, then that makes radicalization and terrorism far more attractive. So the problem has been there a long time. Certainly, the campaign in Yemen, the tens of thousands of dead and wounded in that country, is a burden that everyone involved is going to carry for some time. Everyone involved. And Congress spoke. I mean, they were clear that the United States should rethink our participation in that. The Congress has spoken. I dare say they'll speak again. We have a new administration coming in, and we'll see how they look at this. But none of us should doubt that this is a very difficult problem. It has been externalized. It was an internal problem. But as Iran and Saudi and the United Arab Emirates chose to become involved, now it's a proxy war, and it's being fought over the heads and bodies and lives Yemenis.
Yeah. What really bothers me though is that, yeah, Congress came out and spoke about it, but it took Jamal Khashoggi, it took an American resident being chopped up into little pieces at an embassy for the US to finally be like, what? Whoa, like Saudi Arabia doesn't have the best intentions. Like what's going on? And that just, like, do we have to wait for somebody to be chopped up into pieces to like get the memo that like they may not be doing the right things? Like that bothered me a little bit. I don't know about you.
Yeah, well, hopefully it bothers a lot of us. I believe that challenge goes back to that old saying of it's easier to feel sympathy over the loss of one life rather than 10,000, because this is exactly that. That when you hear 10,000 dead Yemeni children, what does that mean? You can't wrap your mind around it, and you certainly don't feel like you can do something about it.
Right.
Even though we as American citizens can do something about it. But I think it is exactly that old saying of 1 versus 10,000.
Right.
One is it's too big to understand or care about, and one
right.
you can't.
Like remember with the immigration crisis, the refugee crisis, that little boy that was dead on the shore, that all of a sudden woke people up.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah, that storytelling is so important. Oh man, so many interesting things to talk about with you. So one thing that you've also been, another show that I did was about how the current terrorist threat when it comes to the United States, the biggest threat that we face right now is actually domestic terrorism. It's not international terrorism. So I'm wondering, we're talking about local problems to local solutions. You've been part of this Atlantic Council kind of working group on counterterrorism. Like, how much work are you doing now, or have you done around domestic terrorism and solutions to that?
Well, the most important thing is that the American people are waking up to this danger that is ours. There was a lot of pushback against it. It was something that we were talking about in the early 2000s, when I was in the Counterterrorism Bureau, that, local Americans, white Americans were being radicalized in the United States via the internet. And that is that thing that connects strongly domestic terrorism and international terrorism.
Cyber.
Radicalized? Yes, indeed. Indeed. So Americans are beginning to understand this, and we've got to be able to change our terminology. We should not be calling people militia men, they're terrorists. We should not be just calling them white supremacists or they're terrorists. And as soon as we make that connection in our head, then we're going to change how we deal with and perhaps handle it a little better. Because, it was not acceptable to go after real Americans in the way that we were going after terrorists until we changed our understanding of what they were and what they were doing to our country, where we recognize this problem isn't a problem over there, it's a problem right here. So even this administration acknowledges that the most deadly, the largest problem we've got is domestic terrorism, and it has reshaped how we deal, how we talk about, and I hope how we resolve and address this issue.
I just want to briefly acknowledge, we had two listeners in the chat that had comments. I just want to briefly acknowledge them. I think you're going to like this one, Madam Ambassador. For the U.S. to put a woman in the position of a foreign diplomat in an Islamic country is a strong and clear message that should definitely continue. I think that's a really, I agree, Disco Rat.
We can do it.
Totally. And then Shalmar says, I tell you this as someone who is personal friends with several Yemeni journalists. I think he's talking about in terms of radicalization and Yemen. So just thank you for your comments. I really appreciate that. So in terms of domestic terror, with thinking about like the National Security Council and like because I've also been like super intrigued lately of like because usually it's like we have like people that work on domestic issues, and people that work on international issues, right? It's like the State Department, you're working on foreign policy, and, you know, the Bureau of Health and Human Services and Bureau of Education, whatever, they're all working on domestic. But so often we're seeing links between, like I had on another show, Ambassador Verveer, we're kind of seeing links between actually feminist foreign policy needs to kind of go hand in hand with feminist domestic policy, because you can't go tell countries to go do gender quotas when we don't have gender quotas at home. Like there's a hypocritical nature and it's all tied together. So I don't know really.
That has never stopped us before, but go on.
I know. Like we love to do stuff like that. But I guess thinking about is foreign and domestic kind of counterterrorism, do you think, going to be more intertwined in the next administration in terms of countering cyber, like all those types of things?
It already is. It already is. I mean, you know, as I said, we've known about it a while. It's sort of like money laundering and terrorism financing, which is one of the things I worked on as a deputy coordinator for counterterrorism. The same tools that you use to launder money or to stop it are the same tools we use to counter terrorism financing. So that link between foreign and domestic, absolutely, we figured that part out. We have to get after it, and there are some changes in our laws that need to happen.
Right, the domestic terror statutes.
Yes, just as we have helped countries around the world, because many times a lot of poor counterterrorism or anti-terrorism is that the law does not recognize terrorism or the cyber role, the internet's role in radicalization, funding, all sorts of aspects of terrorism. And you have to bring the laws up to speed to address it, to prosecute someone. If there's no, you know, law specific to terrorist violence, you can't prosecute someone as a terrorist. You know, it goes back to common criminal. So there are lots of ways that we partner with other countries around the world to address, as I said, counterterrorism financing, which is like money laundering, the same sorts of tools, prosecution, how you want to arrest someone, because as you mentioned, whether the drone strikes in Yemen made more radicals. One of the things we have learned is that when you have someone in jail for radicalization or terrorism, if you mistreat them while they are in jail, they are bound to become out worse than what they went in.
I know, even if they were arrested and they didn't do anything wrong. That's the irony with U.S. stuff, with Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib.
Not just U.S. I mean, this is an issue around the world. So I wasn't even, in this case, I wasn't pointing a finger at us, because we make this case to others. So we have to recognize it ourselves, as you rightly point out. But yes, so we send lawyers overseas. We send judges overseas. We give trainings on human rights, on how the proper care and feeding of a prisoner while in jail, to help our partners be part of the solution. You know, this is countering terrorism is no one country's problem. One country can't do it. It's all interconnected. We all have to work together.
So to go to the next administration, first of all, like as a, you know, I thought about going to the Foreign Service in 2016 after working at our embassy in Bosnia as just in the Econ Bureau. And part of the reason I didn't was because Trump won. And I was worried that I would be, you know, peddling things that I didn't believe in, or that I countered. You know, and we've seen, I mean, it's wild just how many people have left the State Department, have quit the Foreign Service, have, you know, and then, you know, were forced out because they thought they were like that woman that worked in Iran, the Iran deal, and they thought she was a right-wing media said that she was a terrorist because she was Middle Eastern and worked on the Iran deal. And she was like, what are you talking about? I'm a civil servant. I'm like American. I don't know what my question is here, but like, how do we, like, did you serve under people where you felt like you had policies that you were supposed to be pushing that you didn't personally agree with ever? And like, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, well, that's part of the job. Unless you're making the policy, you're not going to agree with everything. And no one person, even the president, gets to make all of the policy. We
That's
always
true.
have domestic pressures on what we do overseas. It goes back to your earlier comment about the connectivity between foreign policy and domestic policy. So you are a professional. You are a professional diplomat. Your job is to represent the foreign policy priorities of the administration in power. One of the things that was so painful during these last 4 years was to hear the president and those who supported him talk about the deep state with regard to the Department of State. Because those who did not agree with the president with those policies have had a traditional response. It's one I took, it's one many took, which is to leave, to resign. That's what we do, because our job is to serve the priorities of the administration. So anyone who couldn't do that, they weren't trying to undermine it. You couldn't anyway. You go. That's what you're supposed to do. And that's what many, many people did. So we've got some rebuilding to do in the Department of State. I'm extraordinarily hopeful because we have an incoming administration that has made clear their respect for and the value they place on a professional diplomatic corps. So I imagine there are a number of young people and not young people, because keep in mind, you say you didn't come in 2016, but you're allowed to come in up to the age of 55. So you have plenty of time. Yes, plenty of time. And if you have an interest in foreign affairs, foreign policy, if you have a love of the United States and a respect for other cultures and a curiosity about other people, and you like travel, come, because we are rebuilding. Absolutely. It's a good time to come. And we're going to do it. And even with all the, I'm trying to think of a diplomatic word to describe it. I decided last night I would settle on silliness. With all the silliness that was at the top, there were professional diplomats going out each and every day, interacting with foreigners, with engaging with host nations, host governments, and trying to put forward and be the very best that America is and can be. And they have slogged through these last 4 years with a terrible burden. Relief is at hand in about 37 days.
So one thing, Madam Ambassador, that you've mentioned, or that I know personally about you, is that you've been very involved in pushing this administration, even before Biden was the president-elect, to make diversity a priority.
Yes, we pushed every presidential candidate, every single one.
Talk to me about, I mean, I talk about women and social movements and getting stuff done. So like, tell me what you did. Like, how do you do that?
Well, a group of us got together and we're trying to figure out how best to fill a space we saw in the support and care of women in the national security field. It's a male-dominated field. It takes a lot of heart and thick skin to navigate your way through it. But there are organizations to help you if you're at the entry level or if you're at the mid-level. You know, Women in National Security, WISE, NatSec Girl Squad. Those are geared toward women coming up the ladder. But we saw that there wasn't something for senior women, for women trying to get through that last barrier to those top positions, not only Deputy Assistant Secretary for something or other, but Assistant Secretary and Undersecretary and Secretary of. We were trying to provide support for that. So we started this organization, the Leadership Council for Women in National Security, and put the call out, and the response was overwhelming. So we have all these incredible, accomplished, educated, savvy, ready yesterday women. What do we do? So we decided to launch ourselves by asking for all the presidential candidates, at the time there were 17, to take the pledge to seek gender parity for national security positions up, as well as down the ladder. And everybody did, except for one, and you know which one that was, because we went after the two. I think it was Mark Sanford was running at the time, and I believe someone Johnson. I think there were three Republican candidates at the time that we were doing this, and the other two did take the pledge. President Trump did not. But with that pledge, which they took in writing and we announced, then of course we've got something to judge against, something to compare spoken word versus action. So we as an organization, certainly intend to monitor how this is going, to, compliment when appropriate, to comment, and to point out when necessary. So far, I can say that we are very pleased with the gender parity, and I like to be precise in language, and I think it is important that if you have a board or a leadership council or senior leadership in an agency or an organization, and you have 50% women, well, if everybody's white, that's not diversity. That's parity, and it's not good parity if everybody's the same
That's
color
a really good
or
point.
has the same background.
That's parity.
Yes.
That's not diversity.
Gender
I like that
parity.
differentiation.
Yes. Yeah. So
That's a good one.
this organization pushes for gender parity and diversity. So when we decided to ensure that the presidential appointments, the transition team, had candidates for senior level positions, we put together over 800 names of highly accomplished, just awesome women. And we tried to do it for 3 women against every position in what's called the plum book, the Schedule C's.
Wow, that's incredible.
Senate confirmable positions. And yes, for those top positions. And we did that because studies have shown that if you just have, a list of candidates and one of them is a woman, it's highly unlikely she will be selected. A woman begins to have a chance of being selected if there are at least 3 women on that list. 3, not 1. So that's why we were trying for 3 women for every position. And it was a pleasure to pass that list over to the transition team because no one's going to have any problem finding women who are ready before we even got the list over there. And 35% of the women on that list were women of color. Were minorities.
Wow, it's amazing.
American, Latina, Asian. There are plenty of us out there ready to serve.
So you say there's plenty of us out there ready to serve. What's your dream job in the Biden administration? I have to ask that.
Well, yes. And I don't know that I'm saying, although, I've been counseling people and I tell people, don't be afraid to say what you want. The only people who worry about that are women and minorities. Speak up, advocate for yourself.
All right, Madam Ambassador, don't be afraid to say what you want.
Well, listen, I am absolutely committed to inclusion because I know that diverse voices around a decision-making table means better options for solutions are going to come out. So anything that allows me to be part of putting these things not only in place now for this administration, but putting them in place so that they outlast all of us. The United States, America, we've been admiring the problem of lack of inclusion, of lack of diversity. For 30 years, we've been talking about, we're trying to improve our numbers. We're not where we were. We want to be, but we're trying. Done. We have been admiring it, and nobody can say that because we haven't been trying. We are the United States of America, and in this case, we are exceptional. If we decide we're going to fix this problem, we can fix this problem. Accountability, transparency, we can do it. So I know that.
I'm inspired.
Well, you're talking to a true believer.
I'm inspired.
Yeah, we can do it.
So you're thinking more on the personnel side of like creating the infrastructure for kind of inclusive rights.
Yes, because the people are the most, it's what we are. It's what we do. It's, any organization knows the people are the most important resource. I want everyone to feel that they can reach their potential, that they can be part of the solution, that what they bring to the table is going to be valued, and particularly with international affairs, when we're dealing with people of all kinds of backgrounds and colors and religions and sexual orientation, we can't have just one type of diplomat going out there. We need all of us to be able to make those connections, to find those avenues that lead to cooperation and understanding. It's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I completely concur. What do you think? So what do you, oh, no, this was the other question I was going to ask you. So Linda Thomas Greenfield.
Yes.
African-American woman, total badass. This isn't cable, so I can say that. Total badass, warm, like just awesome.
Real.
Real, and a career diplomat. Like what's your feeling when you found out she was picked?
Oh my gosh, shivers. She may be, for the career foreign service, she may be the second career foreign service officer to reach a cabinet level. Just the second one.
She's the
first
only
was Larry
one?
Eagleburger to reach cabinet level. Career Foreign Service, Secretary Eagleburger was the first.
Wild.
And it was a huge thing for him to be named Secretary of State. And it was for a short period of time, as you call, just before the election. But yeah, big deal. And she is the most level-headed, thoughtful. Yeah, it's a real pleasure, not only as an African American, or as a woman, but as a Foreign Service officer, as an American. This is a clear indication of the caliber of person that the president-elect is choosing to put into places to make America what we can be. She's one of the best, and I'm thrilled and extremely happy for her. And happy for America.
Yeah, I am. That's so wild. It's just so funny to me because I was trying to look that up, but I couldn't figure it out. It seems so obvious to put a career FSO as the U.S. ambassador to the UN.
Well, there's been career FSOs before. Richard Holbrooke is a career FSO. It generally goes to a political appointee, and I'm thinking about other ones: Andrew Young, Samantha Power, Susan Rice, and so all political appointees. So Nikki Haley's background from a political appointee wasn't extraordinary. The fact that she had no international experience was I know. Sorry.
You are so good at being diplomatic. This was the one problem with me being a diplomat is I am so opinionated. I can't be diplomatic all the time.
Yeah. Well, that won't get you into trouble. Ambassador Rice was highly opinionated, and people do appreciate straight talk and clarity and honesty, and that can get you a very long way as a diplomat. Sometimes you got to be nicer about it, but honesty can take you a long way. So Linda, not only US-UN, which is great in and of itself, it is an extraordinary position with important influence if one chooses to use it for good, but also as that's right. The other one who first started it as a cabinet official. Oh gosh, I'm seeing her in my mind's eye, and I can't think of her name. She was a professor at Georgetown for many years, Republican, short hair. Anyway, her name will come to me. But they made it a cabinet level position. I think it was under Bush 1, as well as US-UN. So yeah, it's good.
Amazing. I have one more Middle East question to ask you, since I've got the Middle East expert on. So, Trump moved the embassy to you served in the embassy in Tel Aviv. Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Bibi Netanyahu has largely been kind of a train wreck. What's your opinion on? But Israel is a really important ally for the U.S. I mean, Israel is our, I think, most trusted strategic ally in the Middle East. What do you feel like our future is going to be in terms of our relationship with Israel moving forward?
I think that our relationship is always going to be extremely important. We have so much history, so much bilateral history, so many shared values, and many shared interests. Um, no two nations have entirely the same interests. That it doesn't work with anyone, no matter how close. You are two sovereign nations. So we each have to look at what our own priorities are. That said, it obviously is for the president-elect to lay out what the strategy is going to be. He hasn't said too much about it as of yet. I will note that moving embassies is never very easy. There are a lot of things that come into play when you're making a decision like that. I have no idea if he's going to leave it or move it, or it international law does count for something. But as the Israelis have proven again and again, facts on the ground count for often more. So we will have to see how that is going to play out. It is an extremely complex issue, as we know, but hopefully we're going to find that sweet spot that allows us to make progress, because the Palestinians have not been well served. And if the Palestinians aren't well served, that means peace hasn't been well served. And it's something I used to tell my interlocutors when I was working in the Gaza Strip. I would always say, the US and Israel are so very close. We are on Israel's side. Let me be clear about that. I'm a US diplomat. We're trying to be an honest broker, but you should not misunderstand the realities. But our support for, need for, desire for a just, lasting, comprehensive peace for Israel means that it has to be the same for the Palestinians. Otherwise, it won't be. People will forever be fighting against it, trying to change it, overturn it. And so we've got to make sure it's good for the Palestinians as well as good for Israel. So we'll try. But his first thing is COVID and domestic issues.
Right. Right, absolutely. So is there anything else? I mean, we're ending our time here. One thing I wanted to ask you that I forgot to ask you, but what's something that no one has ever asked you that you've wanted to talk about?
Oh my goodness. I think you've done a remarkable job, quite frankly. And I have to think about how to have to put something in my head for that sort of question. I think we've covered the waterfront. The only thing I would re-emphasize is, as you understand, how demanding the work is, the life is of America's representatives overseas. We live and work in war zones. We live and work separated from our families, the same way the military does, except because we have been outward looking, we haven't had the same support and understanding from our fellow citizens. And that can hurt from time to time when when I put my 6-year-old on a plane, and 18 months I lived apart from her and my son and my husband, that was tough work. And many Americans don't understand how many of us have to do that. And we do it with pride, and we do it feeling the privilege of doing so. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak my former colleagues in this way, because all of us try and give our all for this nation that we love so well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your service.
My privilege.
And yet, I think that's one thing that is important to reflect on, is that, when I look at my State Department friends and my military friends, and look, I love my military friends too, but everybody's thanking them. They're getting heroes discounts everywhere they go. They get grad school paid for, and they get paid at the same time. And my State Department friends had all their professional development stuff cut because there was no money in the State Department budget. And it's just like, you're both serving the country. Like, why do my military friends just get so much more? And like, you guys are struggling. Like, that it doesn't seem fair. Yeah. So I think that is really important.
I complained about it to my siblings. My sister, of whom I'm extraordinarily proud, is a retired Navy captain. I mean, she You know, very male dominated. My younger brother was a submariner, and my older brother was an army. He was drafted in the Vietnam War. My older brother, of course, was in an active war. But of my other two siblings and my sister with a long military career, you know, I point out to them around the Thanksgiving table, okay, of the three of us, who's been shot at? Okay. So, so
and you were like, me.
Yeah.
Who's won awards for acts of courage? Me.
Well, you know, that sibling rivalry, as it were. But, you know, the point being is we're all out there doing our best for the nation. We're all out there doing our best.
And I think for the nation, it means for us. And so, you know, it's just, I think that the irony of the impeachment hearings, whether or not they impeach Trump, they say the best thing that happened is people finally understand what the heck foreign service officers do. And like they got visibility.
Yeah, they spoke well.
I hope that we have more, like, I don't know why To End a War by Holbrook has now been made into a movie. I mean, that's like the best book. It's so interesting. And yet there's a million military movies, you know?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and usually in movies, we're the bad guys.
Interesting.
State Department. Yeah, we're often the bad guys.
We got to talk to Hollywood. We got to fix this.
Yes.
Next episode. It has been such a privilege and a pleasure, Madam Ambassador, for taking the time to speak with me, with this audience who's thought you were phenomenal. So I really, really want to thank you, and I want to wish you the best of luck within the new administration, as they would be privileged to have you.
You are very kind to say so. You need to think about the Foreign Service. Again, it's a good place to be. And any of your listeners out there who are American citizens under the age of 55, all those things, if you love travel and enjoy other people and learning about cultures and all the rest of it, then please think about the U.S. Foreign Service or Peace Corps, or the Agency for International Development, or the Foreign Agricultural Service, or the Foreign Commercial Service. We have foreign services in all those agencies. And there's absolutely nothing better than representing your country overseas. So thank you for letting me do my pitch.
Thank you. I loved it. It was so great. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Well, that was a hefty interview, everyone, with Ambassador Gina Abercrombie Winstanley. She was the former U.S. Ambassador to Malta, amongst many other positions. And as we spoke about, she received awards for acts of courage in an attack by Al Qaeda against the American embassy in Saudi Arabia. Unbelievable woman, model American, model diplomat, model woman. I wouldn't be surprised if she's a model mom and wife as well. So I feel personally lucky to have people like that representing the United States. And I think it is really important to reflect on the fact that, you know, people who watch the show know that I've worked in politics a lot, and you run into so many people who say, you know, all politicians are corrupt. Like, politicians are, you know, people in the government, like, they're all corrupt. They're just about making money. They're just about whatever. And it just becomes so obvious when you talk to people like that, how much dedication there is to public service. And it's all about public service, it's all about serving the nation. And, you know, whether you're a politician or a civil servant, you know, that I think we're very lucky in America, because a lot of people don't do it because they want power, unless their name is Donald Trump. They do it because they genuinely care about serving the interests of people. So that's just a brief reflection on that. So thank you so much for tuning into Samanthropolitics this week. Make sure that you're following. If you're on Twitch, if you're on Facebook, there's the Facebook page, Samanthropolitics. Make sure you're subscribed. You can also comment on the Facebook page or on Twitch if there's somebody you want me to interview, or there's an issue that you'd like me to talk about, or a foreign policy conundrum. Happy to reflect on that, look into that. And also, if you found this episode interesting, insightful, valuable, I know somebody on the live stream said it's nice to talk to somebody, or it's nice to watch someone on a live stream that actually sounds credible when they're talking. Huge compliment. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's the best compliment I think I've received, that I'm credible. So yeah, please share this episode with your friends, colleagues. Definitely share it with your parents and grandparents who only watch Fox News. They're the ones that really need to watch this the most. And I will see you next week in Samanthropolitics. Have an amazing weekend. Take care.